Welcome to the Nightclub, guys. It's your host, the Night Wrencher. This past weekend, I had an amazing time. I went ahead and took another off-roading trip out to Cleghorn right here in Southern California. And actually, this truck performed well beyond expectations. And it kind of got me thinking that these trucks are actually very capable, not only in stock form, but especially in modified form. For those of you that don't know, this is a Dodge W100. W stands for the four-wheel drive. And they made these trucks anywhere from 1972 all the way to 1993. There was slight variations throughout the years, but overall it's the same exact truck. As you guys can tell, I have the tail lights, the bed, the tailgate, the doors, fenders, etc. for a 1972 to 1979, but the actual frame is out of a 1980. Although there aren't that many differences in the frame, it's always nice to know that in case you have problems with your old frame, you can go ahead and pick up a newer frame and it's going to go ahead and bolt right up. There's only slight differences in the bolt holes, but all you got to do is make a couple more holes, clearance a couple items, and everything bolts right on. These trucks are excellent off-road trucks for a magnitude of reasons. The first being the drivetrain. As far as I know, the transmissions offered on these types of trucks are pretty much bulletproof. Everything from the 727, a modified 904, the A833, I believe it's called, and so many other different transmission options. You've got engines like the Slant 6, you've got the 318 5.2, you've got the 360 5.9, you've got the 361, I believe came in some of these trucks, the 383, the 400, the 413, and even the 440. So pretty much any V8 that you want, any displacement that you want, was offered in these trucks. And even if you got a Slant 6 version, you can always go ahead and upgrade to the V8 version, just swapping out motor mounts and a little bit of the drivetrain. Front axles on these trucks are actually very good. The front axle that I have on my truck right now, it's a Dana 44 that originally came with my 1975. 1974 to I believe 1978 all came full-time 4x4, which means that there was no selectable hubs, and the transfer case was also an MP208, which meant that it was basically an all-wheel drive truck. A couple modifications, swapping out the hubs with like the 80s style hubs, installing selectable hubs, and replacing the transfer case basically converted this truck to a part-time four-wheel drive truck. My particular axle is actually pretty modified. It's got 456 gears when originally it had 323s. The inner C's have been cut and turned about 10 degrees so I can get the pinion up a little bit higher for my lift. I also have a front spool, which means that the left and right wheels are actually locked together 100%, which is basically the ultimate locker. And the leaf springs I have on it are actually just re-arced Dodge leaf springs, which tug the wheels back a little bit. So eventually I'm going to go ahead and redo that and pull the wheels more forward, just so I can get a little bit more clearance in the back of the fender. Popular modifications for these trucks are either a front locker like a Detroit, or even a spool like I have myself. Another option is to just weld up your front diff, or if you want a little bit more drivability, maybe you want to drive in the snow, maybe you want to drive at high speeds in four-wheel drive, then you want to go ahead and keep that open. Another popular modification for these trucks is actually the crossover steering, where they actually replace the spindle on the passenger side and they introduce a rod that goes all the way across, and they replace the pitman arm on the steering gear, and they have full crossover steering, which basically under high articulation it won't affect your steering angles, whereas right now all the steering's on the driver's side, and if you have extreme angles on the driver's side, your steering becomes less responsive, and in some cases it actually becomes unusable. But doing simple modifications like that, you can go ahead and alleviate that issue. Wheelbases for these trucks are actually 110 inches, which makes it very comparable to the Jeep Wrangler four-door Saharas, and it's about maybe 15 or 20 inches longer than the two-door Saharas. This truck is also 10 inches longer than a Jeep XJ, but it's almost 30 inches shorter than a Jeep Gladiator at a fraction of the cost. The frame rails on these trucks are actually open C channel, and it's only held together by about 4 or 5 cross members that could travel across the body, depending or not if you have the spare tire. And it actually offers a little bit of flex, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, because if you have too stiff of a frame, you tend to have problems with cracking, and something that you tend to load up and move around a lot, you want something a little bit more flexible. If this was a serious competition only truck, you'd probably want to go ahead and box that frame, or make your own frame, especially if you're going to be doing a roll cage. But for all intents and purposes, for the casual off-roader or overlander, you're going to want to go ahead and keep that as open as you can to avoid problems in the near future. Up until a few years ago, you can pick up these trucks for anywhere from $500 to $1,500 for a running truck ready to go. Lately, things have kind of changed, and aside from prices for every single off-road vehicle, and it's 4x4s especially, if you want to get yourself a decent runner, you're looking to pay at least $3,000 and up. If you can go to other different states, you can probably get them a little bit cheaper, especially ones that have a lot of snow, so you're gonna have to deal with a little bit of rust. Although the older style trucks, in my opinion, do look a little bit nicer, the trucks from 80 to 93 offer a lot of great improvements over the older trucks, especially galvanized body parts, aside from painting the interior of the panels and not just the exterior. These older trucks are really prone to rust, especially around the bottom of the doors, the bottom of the fenders, and anywhere around the wheel well in the back. This bed is actually on its way out for the same reason. Not only is it rotted out right here on the wheel wells, the entire bed is rotted out. So if you want to go ahead and get a later model, you can go ahead and pick something like that up. And if you want to convert it to the older style, all you got to do is swap hood, fenders, doors, core support, and front grille, and you'll have an older style looking truck with the newer style everything else. For rear axles, you have a couple different options. The early trucks came with the Mopar 8 3/4. The later trucks came with a Mopar 9 1/4, and it also depended if it was a half-ton truck, 3/4 ton, and 1-ton trucks. The 200s of later and also the 300s, 250s, and 350s came with Dana 60 rear ends, 8-lug axles, but they all came with drums in the back. Upgrades for these trucks are that you can get the newer corporate 9 1/4 from the junkyard trucks from the early 2000s, and those have disc brakes in the back, and you can go ahead and install that. You could also get 2001 and newer Dana 60s off of the trucks. Those will also have disc brakes in the back. If you don't care about sticking to Mopar, you could also use the axles out of the Ford vehicles like the E350 and F350 trucks. Those also have the same bolt pattern as the older Dodge axles. You could also use the Chevy 12 and 14 bolt axles as well, depending if that's a route you want to go ahead and take. Aside from the corporate 9 1/4, you can also use the Ford 8.8 or the Chevy 12 bolt in the back, which will either have 5 lugs in the case of the Ford 8.8 or 6 lug in the case of the Chevy axle. All you would have to do is take off the existing brackets, weld on some spring perches, slap it on, and you are good to go. There's a myriad of options of transmissions for these trucks for both stock and modified applications. You can get the NV 3500 off of the newer trucks. That's a 5-speed manual. You can get that in 2-wheel drive or 4-wheel drive, depending on what you want to do with the transfer case. You could also use the AX15 from the late 90s, early 2000s Durangos and Dakotas. Those were behind the V6 trucks, but they also bolt right up to the 318, 360 trucks, as long as you get the right spacing for your flywheel. You have the 727 in both small block and big block configurations. You have the 904 for the small blocks. The newer trucks might also have the A998, the A999, the RH38, I think. There's a ton of automatic transmission that came on these factory trucks. If you're looking to do a modified setup, anything that can accept a scatter shield and a custom bolt pattern to whatever transmission you want would work with these trucks, because there's plenty of room on the bottom. If you don't want to use the factory engine, you can always have the option to go Ford small block, Ford big block, Chevy big block, Chevy small block, anything you really want to, because these trucks are basically a clean slate for whatever you want to do. Compared to other 4x4 vehicles like Toyota pickups, Wranglers, Jeep XJs, and other vehicles that are very popular for off-road, these trucks are actually at a little bit of a lower price point, especially for what you're getting out of it. Up until a few years ago, you used to be able to pick these trucks up for anywhere from $500 to $1,500, running, ready, and good to go. Now you're looking to pay at least double that, if not more, for the single cab short beds, and even more than that for the extended cab or double cab trucks, short bed or long bed. You could probably still get the single cab long bed trucks for slightly cheaper, but normally those trucks are two-wheel drive. But don't let that deter you, because there are a lot of kits that you can use to go ahead and convert your two-wheel drive into a four-wheel drive. Just keep in mind you are going to have to supply your own axles, drive shaft, tractor case, transmission, etc., but it can be done. If you can get a truck for a cheap enough price, it might be worth it to put in your own custom axles in it and get yourself going. For anybody in the market for a ready-to-go runner, you can't go wrong with the single cab, short bed, automatic, 318, four-wheel drive, and you guys should be good to go. So hopefully this helps somebody out that's in the market for one of these. I will see you guys all in the next one. Night Wrencher out.